Hello, welcome back to the Talking Podcast. This is the number one podcast platform in Rwanda. We are super happy to be back again this week. My name is David Mvita, aka The People's Choice. I'm excited to be back. And of course, we are bringing you nothing but the very best of a very rich conversation, actually. Yes, thank you very much for the support that you've given us so far. And we're glad to say that actually Rwanda has got the highest listenership for our podcast. Yes, from the recent generated report, it shows that Rwanda has got so many listeners, Kenya as well, Nigeria as well as Canada. So we are very much excited for that, and we really are thankful for the support that you've given us. This week we are bringing you another educative and very more rich conversation that's gonna really help you to or build you in one way or the other. It's a conversation that we've thought for over the past months that so many people actually struggle around it, and while others find it very helpful, or they enjoy actually talking about, or it's something that they have worked on several times, right? So we also want to have this conversation, and I'm not alone. I have with me here a very incredible person who is joining us as the guest. I think he appears for the very first time on this platform. So I'll just quickly dive into it and introduce my guest this week. Hello, Jeremy. Welcome to the Talking Podcast.
Hi, David. How's it going?
Yes, finally, you've made it.
Finally. Very happy to be here. Set up in our Kigali hub, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And first of all, congrats on the numbers,
Thank
the
you.
listenership,
Thank you very much.
as well as with the diaspora in Canada.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I meant that you've been a fan now of this podcast for quite some time.
Admittedly, yes. So I first heard about it.
The fastest growing podcast in Rwanda.
I first heard about it when I visited in January, and I met you finally.
Yeah.
And then I've been plugging it ever since to my network, saying, listen to the fastest growing podcast in Rwanda,
exactly.
The People's Choice.
Yes, sir.
I love it.
Interesting. And by the way, to give a very big shout out to the people that are hosting us today, which is the African Leadership University Kigali Hub. Of course, that's where we are. You know? As you can see, we do have things here. So yeah, how do you find it being?
So how do I find it being in the space? I love it. I think it's an extension of our campus. Basically, it's one of the hubs that is our standalone place. It's it's in a building that is got other members of the community that are in industry. So it's a great space for our students and staff to come and connect with the wider Kigali community. I mean, just down the road we have Bank of Kigali, all of those sort of things, right? So it's number one, it provides opportunity for another space for our students to come and connect, do stuff like this.
Exactly.
Literally this morning we had Teach for Rwanda here, visiting and connecting with some of our students. Second is that it gives the opportunity for our students really to engage with members of industry, invite them to the space, and so forth and so on. So yeah, very excited about it.
Yeah, let's dive into the conversation. We're looking at holistic entrepreneurship, and the most interesting part is I've seen your career background. You're someone, if actually there is someone who is an expert in the wellness field, it's you. Like you've worked really on I think various institutions, and the fun fact is you've always been working maybe in the Department of Wellness. Right? But before we dive into that, we'd love to know your background.
Sure.
I'm just thinking or imagining of a young Jeremy. What did you aspire to be like when you were young?
Yeah, so I mean, in high school, it's funny, right? You when you speak to many people, there's always a one teacher that is very influential for the most part.
Yeah.
And I think right from in high school, I was torn between a world of psychology or accounting. Believe it or not, those were the two things, because I really enjoyed accounting and maths. Anyway, long story short, had a really good guidance counselor, and was very open to youth empowerment and youth wellness, and something about that always connected with me. And then after high school, I entered university for my undergrad, and I was majoring in psychology as well as business. About a year later, I dropped the business element, so to speak. I just took a couple of electives and focused purely on psychology. I eventually got my psych honors degree through Nelson Mandela University back in South Africa. I started working as a registered counselor in for a private company that helped high school students get into university and source bursaries and scholarships and stuff. Then I decided I needed a break from South Africa, and I moved over to South Korea for 4 years.
Oh, interesting.
Where I taught English right from pre-primary through to high school and university. I went there. I was supposed to go there for a year to get some experience, but I ended up staying there for 4 years, excuse me. And then I decided to come back to South Africa to do my master's in psychology. Look, I had been rejected about 3 times from a master's program.
On.
Yeah. It was tough. It's really tough to get into a master's program in psychology in South Africa. They choose, each university I think chooses 12 students a year. Anyway, I was lucky enough to get in and did my master's in psychology, became a qualified psychologist, wrote the board exam, all the logistics that go with it. And I've been practicing psychology for about 10 years now, with predominantly in the tertiary education space.
Correct.
So working with university students, and I've run private practice in the past as well, but also I've got a strong interest in personality psychology and holistic well-being. That's the main thing. Yeah.
Perfect. So would you say you are where you are right now? This is a position or a space where you had seen yourself 10 years ago?
Yes and no.
Really?
So yes, in the sense that my goal was, once I had completed my master's in psych, was to spread the gospel of holistic well-being, so to speak, on our continent, right? Whether it was in South Africa or anywhere, any other country on our continent. And the goal was to be in student wellness. Thankfully, in 2016, ALU came along on my radar, and I recognized that this is an opportunity for me to reach a more diverse African population. Because in South Africa, it was mainly South Africans, a few expats here and there in the institution that I worked in at that time. But in ALU, we have students from almost 38 African countries, right?
Yeah, correct.
And so I saw myself being in a position in this institution to start really sharing what I believe holistic wellness is, but then also hearing from my colleagues that I work with, from my students that I work with, what wellness means in their communities, and how we can build an African wellness narrative, which eventually fights against the stigma attached to mental health. So yeah, that's the yes part.
Yeah.
The no part is I didn't necessarily envision myself being at an institution like ALU, which was startup university and moving real quick. But I don't regret it at all. I love it. I think I'm in the space.
Yeah.
Part of me where I need to be right now.
Great. I think it's all good. It's all good. Yeah. As long as you're proud where you are, you're comfortable really, and most important, you have the career growth.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, that's very important. Now, how did you find educational institutions like ALU in terms of a fit for you into the holistic entrepreneurship?
So when I think back to the institutions that I worked in prior to ALU, was still very much the traditional setup of tertiary education, right? So our students come into the classroom, there's a lecturer there's 500 students in the lecture hall, half of them are sleeping, and as you progress and outside of the academics, there's certain programs that students can do as extracurricular and well-being, wellness or holistic wellness or leadership or entrepreneurship sort of being in the corner, or one element within this in these various institutions. ALU flips that for me. They put leadership at the center of what we're doing, right? Entrepreneurship at the center of what we're doing. So no matter what degree you're doing, whether it's business or SE or BL, social science in Mauritius, there's that entrepreneurial mindset that is sort of embedded within our community, not just our students, staff as well. Yeah. And that's what energized me. It's the first time I've been in a space where I've also thought to myself, look, I'm a psychologist by profession, but I also need to think of or push myself to grow myself in other areas. in business, in entrepreneurial thinking, all of these type of things, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it makes sense to answer your question, David. Like I like how we at ALU have sort of flipped the narrative of what traditional education looks like and what it should look like on our continent, right?
Perfect. So for you, I'm very interested because you have a very rich background in this subject actually. What does holistic entrepreneurship entails to you?
So the way I would define holistic entrepreneurship is almost when you have an individual who uses their background experience and their lived experience, notifies a gap or problem in their community that they're trying to solve, utilizes their network, right? Gets the community as well involved, and then turns it into a business, an opportunity, or a venture, so to speak. I'm definitely not an expert on entrepreneurship, but that's definitely from my experience and from what I've seen and from speaking to people that have gone through this is sort of my takeaway. Is that someone who identifies that wicked problem in their community and leverages their network, their community to make it come to life.
Talking of entrepreneurship, you just mentioned that you're not really an expert in that area, but of course maybe you somehow have a story with the entrepreneurship part. Like, do you have any story related to that, and maybe you can share?
Oh, for sure, like my personal,
it's a personal entrepreneurship story.
I mean, look, I honestly didn't think that I have an entrepreneurial bone in my body, but being an ALU, you and in this environment where we speak about this, I started a few side hustles. They all failed.
Oh man!
But I know why.
Really?
So for example, one of the first things I really tried was I live in Mauritius. I'm based there. Lots of tourists. So I thought I'm going to buy a car and start like a car rental place, and then it didn't really work out. And of course, COVID hit. No tourists coming and all of that sort of thing. So sold that car, broke even, started some food stuff on the side. But what I realized is in all of these little ventures that I put up or tried it was more for fun. It wasn't anything that I was necessarily passionate about. And I really didn't necessarily identify a problem that I was trying to solve and really fall in love with that problem, right? It was more like I want to make a few extra coins on the side. But fast forward now, I'm actually working with a co-founder who's based in Kenya. I met her through our MBA program here at African Leadership School of Business, which I just completed. And we are now working on designing and implementing a holistic wellness platform for two markets. One is for the high school student, and then for the employee wellness employers and employees. And so now that's something I'm really passionate about. So we're doing all the hard work. We know what the problem is, and hopefully that one goes better than the car rental venture.
Interesting. We really do hope for the best.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we know that the world was affected by the COVID-19, and so many businesses across the world were affected as well. So many entrepreneurs, and I believe the well-being of most entrepreneurs, businesses were affected, right? And we have maybe other people who may have even been tempted to shut down their businesses, while others looked at it as an opportunity to actually start up businesses right now. To those people who really found COVID-19 like a huge setback, and maybe they got affected, let's say, psychological-wise, because it came with so much stress. Now, you as an expert in the wellness sector, how did you expect, let's say, a lot of entrepreneurs to cope up with that situation that they were in?
Yeah, listen, COVID hit all of us, right? In every industry, whether you were a long-standing business for 40 years, education space, we were hit, entrepreneurship, everyone was hit by it. And I think in particular to entrepreneurs that as you said, we saw two things happen. One, people either shut down completely and lost businesses, or two, people made businesses out of their situation. But not a lot of people talk about the middle piece that happened, where a lot of entrepreneurs had to actually pivot or shift in strategy, right? And that is what was interesting to me, is to I speak from friends of mine who had to do this, and so instead of this entrepreneur saying, "Look, business isn't working, I have to shut down," there were those out there that said, "Okay, this is the situation that I'm in right now. What do I need to pivot or change within my strategy?" The goal or the mission of the business doesn't change, but the strategy shifts, the how to get there. And when I started speaking to some of my friends and people in my network about this, one of the overwhelming responses that I got was, that one, they had to do it. There was no choice.
Yeah.
Their livelihood depended on it, right? And when you dig a little bit deeper and ask them, what do you think it is about you that allowed you to pivot and make these changes? The word that comes out, David, was resilience. So these entrepreneurs had I like to think of it as, an extra level of resilience that allowed them to persevere and pivot and all of that, versus the entrepreneurs that maybe had to shut down. And I don't mean to speak for anyone's particular situation, right? It's all different. But the people that I engaged with, and then of course, as a psychologist, I dig a little bit deeper, and I'm like, so where does that resilience actually come from?
Yeah.
And some of the feedback or conversation would be, well, this is something, I'm used to being in a space where things are difficult, whether it was from my childhood or through my life experience, but then also in particular from the entrepreneurs, this mindset of change. Change is good. Change is growth, right? And really embracing that idea of they have to change or adapt to the situation at hand. Now, given COVID was an extreme situation, right? Unpredicted, a lot of people weren't ready for it, but I saw that was sort of the common thread through the entrepreneurs that I spoke to who had to pivot in that space. It's like, look, we have to embrace change, number one, and we have to really articulate our resilience.
Yeah.